What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Wrestling Decoded. And today, we're telling the story of one specific night in wrestling history that permanently changed how the entire industry operates behind closed doors. Not the most exciting championship change. Not the flashiest WrestleMania moment, the one that made wrestlers demand contract clauses that hadn't existed before, made fans question whether anything they were watching was real, and turned a company owner into one of the most compelling television villains in entertainment history. Not because a writer thought it up, but because it actually happened. November 9th, 1997, the Montreal Screwjob. Let's build it from the ground up. Let's get into it. If you're into these deep dives into wrestling's most defining real moments, that's exactly what this channel does. Go ahead and subscribe before we start. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand the year leading up to it, because this wasn't a spontaneous moment. It was the end of a long, slow deterioration between two men who had genuinely stopped trusting each other entirely. Bret Hart had been WWE's top performer through much of the early and mid-90s, a five-time WWE champion, and the man Vince McMahon had publicly positioned as the face of his company. But by 1997, the financial reality of WWE had shifted significantly. WCW, under Ted Turner's money and Eric Bischoff's aggressive tactics, was winning the Monday Night War consistently, and McMahon was quietly struggling to keep up financially. In October 1997, McMahon went to Hart and told him directly that he couldn't honor the remaining financial terms of the 20-year contract he'd offered Hart just years earlier. He was releasing him from the deal. WCW came calling almost immediately, and Hart signed with them. He was leaving WWE for the company's biggest competitor, and he was leaving as the reigning WWE champion. Here's where the situation turned genuinely complicated, because Bret Hart had something almost no performer in WWE history had ever been given: legitimate creative control over his own character written into his contract. He couldn't be forced to lose the title in a way that contradicted the character he'd built. And in particular, he had specifically negotiated that he could not be made to lose in Canada, his home country where his fan base was strongest. McMahon publicly assured Hart that his wishes would be respected. They sat down together and discussed options. Hart offered to drop the title to someone other than Shawn Michaels, or at a different location, or to vacate it the night after Survivor Series rather than losing it there. By Hart's own account, McMahon agreed to these terms. He gave Hart his word. Here's a question worth sitting with. In a business built entirely on the willingness of performers to trust each other and the people running the company, what actually happens when that trust gets broken at the very highest level? What happened at Survivor Series 1997 in Montreal's Molson Center is still, nearly 3 decades later, the most documented and most debated single night in wrestling history. Hart and Shawn Michaels, two men with genuine, well-documented personal animosity between them going back years, competed for the WWE Championship in front of Hart's own countrymen. Multiple accounts confirm the two men had privately agreed on a finish for the match that didn't involve Hart losing the title that night. What neither Hart nor most people in the building knew was that McMahon had already decided privately, days earlier, that he couldn't risk Hart showing up on WCW television the following week still holding the WWE Championship. In front of Hart's countrymen at Montreal's Molson Center, McMahon called for the bell as Michaels trapped Hart in Bret's own signature hold, the sharpshooter. Even though Hart never tapped out, fans were shocked when they realized that McMahon had ordered the bell to be rung. The referee that night was Earl Hebner, a man Hart had personally trusted and had even asked beforehand whether there was any chance of a screwjob happening. Hebner told him no. He was in on it the entire time. McMahon had concocted an underhand plot to get the title off his biggest star. Michaels, for his part, has given varying accounts of his own involvement over the years. In his 2005 autobiography, Michaels claimed the screwjob was Triple H's idea, though he later wrote that it was actually Jerry Briscoe who had designed the whole thing for Vince. What every version of the story agrees on is that Hart himself had no idea it was coming until the bell rang. Quick pause here. Drop a comment on whose version of events you actually believe, because this is one of those stories where the contradictions between accounts are part of what makes it so endlessly discussed decades later. What happened immediately after that bell rang is the part that tends to get overlooked in favor of the larger controversy. Hart, realizing in real time what had just been done to him, spat directly at McMahon at ringside, a real unscripted act of contempt visible to anyone watching closely. He then went backstage, and by every account from people present that night, punched McMahon in the face in what became one of the only truly real backstage confrontations this channel has ever covered. A man settling a genuine professional betrayal with one clean shot, captured later in the documentary Wrestling with Shadows. Hebner fled the building so quickly that Hart couldn't confront him directly backstage. McMahon reportedly required medical attention after the punch, left with a blackened eye and a sprained ankle. The immediate fallout moved in multiple directions at once. Hart left for WCW, where he spent the next several years, a run most observers consider significantly below what his career had been in WWE. The championship itself went to Michaels, who held it through early 1998, and McMahon, rather than hiding from the heat the moment had generated, leaned directly into it, appearing on Raw the following night in character, owning what he'd done, essentially announcing the birth of the Mr. McMahon villain persona that would go on to anchor WWE's entire Attitude Era and help the company win the Monday Night War against the very promotion Hart had gone to join. The incredible realness of the proceedings, as well as long-reaching effects, including the dawn of the Attitude Era and WWE's victory over WCW in the Monday Night War, have helped make the Montreal Screwjob an indelible moment in the company's rich history. The long-term industry effects are genuinely significant and rarely get discussed in full. Following Montreal, wrestlers across WWE and beyond began demanding protective clauses in their contracts that hadn't been considered necessary before. Guarantees that finishes had to be agreed upon in advance. Protections against exactly what had happened to Hart. The concept of a finish being a sacred agreement between both parties, something the company couldn't simply override in the moment, became a standard expectation in ways it hadn't been before November 9th, 1997. Montreal didn't just change Bret Hart's career. It changed the legal framework professional wrestlers negotiated within for years afterward. And the story never fully closed because the people involved in it never fully agreed on what it actually was. Hart has maintained consistently that he was genuinely betrayed, that McMahon gave him his word and broke it with premeditation. McMahon's public position has shifted over the years, at various points framing it as a necessary business decision he had no real alternative to, and at other points acknowledging the genuine moral complexity of what he chose to do. Michaels spent years deflecting direct questions about his own role before eventually, in a famously emotional moment with Hart on an episode of Raw in 2010, the two men reached something resembling peace, though Hart has since said that reconciliation was more complicated behind the scenes than it appeared on camera. Hebner has given his own accounts that differ in details from everyone else's. Even the people who were in the room that night can't fully agree on exactly what they witnessed. That's genuinely part of what makes this the most controversial championship moment in professional wrestling history. Not just that a title was taken from someone against their will, but that nearly 3 decades later, the full truth of that night still hasn't been settled by anyone who was actually there to see it happen. What's your honest take? Does what McMahon did that night have any justification from a business perspective, or was it simply a betrayal regardless of the circumstances? Let me know down in the comments. And if you want more of these deep dives into wrestling's most defining real moments, make sure you're subscribed to Wrestling Decoded. There's plenty more of this still to uncover.